Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to this week's episode of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys tuning in for today's episode. And I know you guys that watch the channel a lot, I didn't put a video out last week. It was one of those weeks I had so much going on, I just didn't have time to do it. So a little late this week, but I'll try to get back on schedule next week. Guys, today we're going to be having a discussion on timing, the importance of timing, and I think that's probably one of the most underrated aspects of bass fishing success is being at the right place at the right time. It makes all the difference in the world. So we're going to have sort of a foundational, a little bit shorter video this week on timing. I think it's going to really add up to some long-term success for you guys. Also, before we get started, guys, just a couple quick housekeeping tips to keep the lights on here at Advanced Bass Fishing. If you guys like the content here and you want to support the channel, the best thing that you can do is just go into my description. I put in the Advanced Bass Fishing videos and use and bookmark my Tackle Warehouse link if you anytime you need to buy fishing tackle. If you do that, that's a great way to give back to the channel. Much appreciated. And like I said, a big thank you for me and my family for you guys that are doing that. So I just want to let you all know that. Okay, guys, bass fishing is, if you guys watch the channel much and you've seen my other stuff, you know that it's the most complicated, difficult sport in the world simply because the amount of variables that you have. Bass fishing is literally nothing but an endless line of controlled and uncontrolled variables. The controlled variables like, picking the right color lure, that's something you have control over. Uncontrolled variables can be things like the weather, fishing pressure that you don't have any control over. So what you have to do in fishing is you have to maximize, the things that you can control and just not worry about the things you can't control. That's the big dilemma we have as anglers. And one of the most critical things about actually catching bass is being at the right place at the right time. And that doesn't get enough press. You don't hear people talking about this and very much because there are a lot of other factors out there that play into it. But to me, I have seen timing time and time again make a big difference, because let me give you an example here, guys. It's like, as a tournament angler, you're dealing with, other anglers in the tournament a lot. And say, for example, at 9 o'clock in the morning, you pull down a stretch of shoreline and you fish that shoreline and you don't catch anything. And then you get back to the weigh-in, or you talk to your buddies later in the afternoon and you find out that your buddy fished the same stretch of shoreline at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon and caught a limit of fish on it. And you go, well, God dang, I fished there 9 o'clock in the morning and I never had a bite. This is what happens in bass fishing a lot, is there are a set of variables out there that determine when an area is better than another area. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of different factors. Let's go back to that scenario on the bank. Say, for example, we're talking about this 300-yard stretch of rocky shoreline, rocky bank. There may be some laydowns on it, maybe a few docks. You go through there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it's like, a little bit low light conditions. Maybe there's some shade on the water since it's still 9 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it's cloudy out. Maybe the wind's blowing 10 miles an hour or whatever. You got a certain set of circumstances that were present when you were there at 9 o'clock. So you go down through there under those conditions, and it's a little bit of shade on the water, all the things we talked about, cloudy, water visibility, such and such. You don't catch any. Your buddy goes back down there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but when he rolls through there, the sun is at a different angle. So instead of there being shade on the bank, there's some sun on the bank that's casting off some shade around some of the objects maybe. And then instead of being cloudy when you were there at 9 o'clock, maybe those clouds rolled through and you got a partly cloudy day when you're there. And then maybe when you were there at 9 o'clock, the wind was blowing into the bank, maybe at 10, 15 mile an hour winds. And then when your buddy gets there at 2 o'clock in the afternoons, the wind's laid down and there's no wind whatsoever. So you have a completely different set of situations between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. that can sometimes either activate or deactivate the fish. And if he goes, say for example, you were going through there pitching and flipping a jig around whatever shallow cover is on that rocky bank, you didn't catch him, and your buddy goes through there and he's pitching the jig in the same type of areas and he's catching fish, that's because maybe those fish repositioned and relocated based upon the conditions that change during the day. Your sunlight intensity changed, your wind changed, the angle of the sun change, everything in there made some type of a factor in determining whether those fish are less active or not. So realize that all the time is that, you know, just because you go through an area that doesn't produce for you, that does not mean that that area is not good. One of the things that you have to remember, let's take, for example, like fishing a main lake point. Say you go to a point that you've caught a bunch of fish on before, and you go through there and don't catch a fish. One of the things that you have to know is like for example, bass live on points all the time. There's hardly not a point, a major point on a lake that doesn't have bass swimming on it. Now, whether you get those fish to bite or not, again, depends on timing. So if you go through an area that you are pretty confident there's fish there and you don't catch any fish, don't just write that off. You always want to come back in there a little bit later in the day and give it a try under a different set of circumstances. That's how you determine the best times of the day for the fish, you know, to be active or not. Now, the time of the day, when you're talking about timing, a lot of it has to do with the technique that you're fishing. It has to do with the technique. It has to do with the time of year. It has to do with every set of variables that go around in it. It has to do with the water clarity, the water level, and whatever. Okay, let's throw out a couple different scenarios here, like what we're talking about. Let's say it's June and, you know, water temperatures are 75 degrees or something like that. The fish are done spawning and you get out there right off the bat in the morning during the low light condition and you're throwing a Xerospook or a Chugger, you know, down a shady bank and you're catching fish until that shade goes away. Say, for example, it works for the first couple days while the light is low. And then, you know, after 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning, that area is done. Now, that's a pretty obvious example that a lot of people understand about timing. Bass are going to be in an area shallow. If the water's warm, you're catching them on top water under those low light conditions. And after the sun comes up, gets a little bit brighter, those fish move out of there. That's an easy thing to figure out. So some of the timing considerations of fishing are very obvious. That's a very obvious one. But the other timing areas are not so obvious. Let's say, for example, it's the same month, it's June, and the fish are done spawning, and you're on a lake like Kentucky Lake where you're fishing drop-offs, where the fish get on those particular drop-offs. Now, that in a situation like that, since you know those fish are living there, and they're down in that 8 to 12 foot of water, the sunlight conditions and every other variable that goes through there are not that important, because when you're throwing a deep diving crankbait down an 8 to 10 foot drop off or something like that, it doesn't really matter if it's cloudy or sunny or if the wind's blowing or not. If those fish are there, you know, they're not going to be that sensitive to the conditions. But what will make those fish sensitive in a situation like that is maybe current flow. And say, for example, you go through there at 9 o'clock in the morning and you're cranking your big crankbait through there, you don't catch any fish, and then somebody comes back there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you know, the lake authorities or the lake managers or the whatever, the GRDA or who controls the water flow opens a couple turbines, and you got a little bit of current flow coming through there, and that activates those fish, and all of a sudden those fish at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, they start turning on a little bit. That's a matter of timing. I'll give you guys a really prime example of this. If you guys have fished many of the Alabama lakes, like Lay Lake or Logan Martin, areas that get a lot of current pulled through there, normally what happens is they start releasing water maybe at 10 o'clock in the morning in those particular areas, and it's very noticeable. If you're there before 10 o'clock, there's no current, it's just slack water like that. And if you're there maybe at 10:30 or 11 o'clock, you notice a considerable current coming through there. And that current, a lot of time, is going to position those fish, it's going to activate those fish, it's going to make a big difference. Now, I'll give you a prime example. The last tournament I fished at Lay Lake was a Bassmaster Invitational, or a Bassmaster Open down there a couple of years ago. And I was flipping up the river. I was flipping a jig along you know, shoreline cover up in the river up there. And before they turned the current on, I would catch a fish here or there, you know, just scattered. But once they turned that current on, the current would create eddies behind some of the cover. And I could go down through there and I could look, and there'd be cover everywhere on the bank. And anytime that I saw like a current break, like there was a log coming down to the water, or there's something that broke current, I could pitch that jig right into that current and catch those fish that I couldn't catch before they turned that on. That was a matter of timing. Every situation that you have out there, again, is timing. And there's so many complexities in that you can't, I could just almost write a book on the scenarios with that, because when you're talking about timing, it has to do with the time of year, the specific water temperature, the specific water clarity, the depth that the fish are in, the wind that is occurring at the time. There's a huge amount of things that go into that. And a lot of times you can't say, okay, it's going to be good at 9 o'clock in the morning and then it's going to be tough at 2 o'clock. A lot of times you just don't know. You figure it out by fishing through those areas. And the more experience that you get, the more that you can pretty much judge how that may or may not be productive. Now, sometimes it plays more of a role than others. And I'll give you another example here, guys, what I'm talking about, how timing doesn't play much of a role and how it plays a huge role with it. I remember a lot of different tournaments that I fished where the water was flooded out. And, say there was 3 or 4 foot of water in the bushes or shallow cover. And I have fished scenarios like that where, it's raining, it's cloudy, it's sunny, it's partly cloudy, it's before front, it's after front, and never, regardless of the conditions out there, I catch fish almost any time that I go there. It's like I can flip in that area at 8 o'clock in the morning if it's cloudy and catch fish, and I can come back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to catch fish in that same cover if it's sunny out. If you have fish that are positioned in cover that doesn't require some type of an external condition activation to get those fish to bite, you're going to catch them in those situations regardless. So I might be able to catch a fish in flooded cover all day long, regardless of the situations. Yet in another situation, let's say, for example, if I'm fishing a spinnerbait in October and I'm fishing the spinnerbait down a windy bank and it's a cloudy condition, I'm catching them, the clouds and the combination of the clouds and the wind and the water temperature and the time of the year and the water visibility, that makes it conducive that you got to have those exact set of conditions for that to work. So if that happens like at 10 o'clock in the morning and then all of a sudden at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you lose a little bit of wind, maybe you lose a little bit of your low light condition, and those fish stop biting. It's like fish constantly change and constantly react to changes in their environment. And another thing that you guys have probably seen if you bass fished enough is like, let's take, for example, if you're on a good topwater bite. I'll give you another example of this. I was fishing a Bassmaster tournament at Lake Cherokee, and I was catching them on a Zerespook there. And during this particular day, it was like it was cloud cover, but it was a constant mix of the intensity of the clouds. It's like, 1 minute it would be, a cloud would come over the sky and you just see it would get darker. And then the next minute, a cloud would roll by and it was maybe one of those wispy cirrus clouds and it would get a little bit brighter out. And there was a subtle difference in the light intensity changing because the cloud cover was constantly changing. And almost every time that it got a little bit darker, like a thicker, cumulus cloud, like a big cloud came behind, I'd catch a fish on the top water. And as if that cloud moved out and it got a little bit brighter, I'd never get a bite. It's like, and that changed from like minute to minute to minute like that. It was like, that is the thing that we're talking about with timing. So how you figure out that timing is critical is just you have to be aware of it. It's like one of the most important things you can do as a bass angler is any time that you catch a fish, I don't care what it is, but when you catch that fish and, unhook it, whatever, throw it back in the water, before you really get into the next cast or even why it, just have it on your mind, take mental note of everything that happened during that fish catch. Like, what was the wind speed? What was the wind direction? What was the sunlight intensity? How fast were you moving that bait? Try to assimilate as much information as possible around that fish catch, because you can duplicate that. That is information that is being fed to you that can allow and add up to the next fish. So main thing with it, guys, is just be aware of it. I mean, it's like timing is one of the most easiest things to figure out in bass fishing, and it can be one of the most difficult things to figure out in fishing, depending upon the scenario behind your technique that you're using. But be aware of it, and then you can duplicate it. It's like once you figure out certain techniques, when they work the best, that is when you can really capitalize on it. Because if you've got a lot of experience in bass fishing and you know the specific times that they're going to bite a big swim bait, when you see those conditions, that's when you pick up the big swim bait and you really commit to it. It's like you know when to pick something up, you know when to put something down based upon those conditions and the timing that you have figured out, you know, during the day there. So, like I said, it's just another one of those things that makes bass fishing tough, because I can give you guys a basic foundation like I did today, but nevertheless, you always have to listen to what the fish are telling you, because a lot of times the fish do something in complete opposite of what you think they're going to do, and that's why you go out one day and catch them, and you go out the next day and don't catch them. So anyway, guys, hope that shed some light on it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys later.